What's up guys, and welcome back to my channel Pitol in Motion, a place for busy people and dream chasers looking to achieve their goals in a more efficient way. So if you're new here, hello, welcome. My name is Ira and I do project management, self-improvement and the occasional lifestyle videos. So be sure to hit that subscribe button if that sounds interesting to you. And to the rest of the Pitol in Motion community, hello, welcome back. My loyal subs, love to have you here. Let's get straight into this one. So today guys, I'm going to be completing part 3 of my project management tool series. So if you haven't been with me right from the beginning, make sure you go and watch part 1 and part 2 of the project management tool series. This series is really focused and targeted towards people that are just getting into project management and you might just not have the tools you need to get started, such as a project schedule and what that looks like, how do you put that together, and also a budget. So in part 1, that's exactly what I did. I broke down how to make a really simple project schedule, so go and watch that. And then in part 2, I broke down how to make a really simple project budget. So like I said, if you ain't watched it guys, make sure you go watch that. But today in part 3, as we conclude, we are gonna look at something so essential. Guys, let me tell you this. If you get a new project, that's great, congratulations. If you want to submit a schedule and you want to submit a budget, remember, you need to make a schedule before you make a budget. That's all good, wonderful, but you're not going to do that without considering RAID. I'm telling you this right now, do not submit your budget or your schedule without your RAID log also. And we're gonna get straight into that. If you're wondering what is RAID or why is it so important, stick with me, we're gonna break it down. Let's get it popping. So let's start off with a simple definition. What is RAID? So like most things in project management, RAID is an acronym and it stands for risks, assumptions, issues and dependencies. It is used as an analysis tool, as a framework in order to govern your project plan and also your budget. So you can see what things do we need to analyze here to know that this is taking place in a controlled environment. When you start up a project, you need to be aware of your risks. You need to be aware of your assumptions, your issues and dependencies before you submit your budget or your schedule, because if you don't, effectively what you're saying is, I can deliver this at this in this time frame at this cost and nothing possibly can go wrong, which we all know is not true. Many things can go wrong in a project, and it's really important at the beginning that you identify your RAID, log it down, and then you also assess it throughout the life cycle of the project to make sure that you are not falling off target and that you're able to know what's going on, what needs to happen at certain times in the project, and so that you have better control of that project. So let's start with the first one, and the first one is risks. So what are risks? Risks are events that may occur over the life cycle of the project that could have a detrimental effect to the success of that project. There can be positive risks, but we're not talking about those right now. Usually in project management, we are more concerned with the risks that will have a detrimental impact if they are materialized, and therefore they are negative risks. Risks at the beginning of a project are so important so that we understand what could go wrong, and we can, more importantly, put things in place to ensure that it doesn't actually actualize, and we can either contain or mitigate that risk before it gets to a stage where it's getting out of control. It's also really important to identify your risks right at the beginning of the project, because some risks are just not worth taking. No matter how much money or time you push at it, we just don't want to take it, because if it should happen, it will have such a big impact. It's just not worth even starting the project at all. So right at the beginning of the project, it's really important that you gather your team, gather all the major stakeholders, sit them down and start to address, okay, out of this plan that we've got going on, this schedule, we know what we need to do to get to where we need to get to. What could go wrong? Let's start to identify all of those risks and to write them down in something called a risk register. All right, so on the screen, I'm going to get up a very, very simple version of a risk register, and you can make this in anything like Excel, Word, whatever you're comfortable with. It just needs to be a couple columns and a couple rows, maybe more rows if you have lots of risks, but there are some very, very key things that you need to make sure are in your risk register, and I'm just going to go through that right now. Cool, so the first thing we want to start off with is just a risk number, and this is just so you can easily point to a risk and everyone knows which one you're talking to. There could be over 50 risks in a project. I am on a project right now and it's risky, you know. I've captured a lot of risks. Some have been closed off, some of them are still there, but you want to be able to make sure that that risk has a unique number to it so you know exactly which one you're talking about when you're discussing it with stakeholders. Next, you'll need a risk description, and that's simply just saying what the risk is. I usually like to start off my risks with, there is a risk that yada 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 yada. So for example, keeping it in line with everything we've been talking about, project 4 and creating this lovely mobile device into the market, I'm gonna say this: there is a risk that the components we need for one of our prototype builds do not arrive in the factory on time. That's it. That is the risk, and it's a very big risk. If you work in the product world right now and you're trying to order components, you already know that is like probably the biggest risk on your risk log at the moment. That is a simple risk description. Next thing you need to put on there is the impact. What happens if that risk becomes a thing? Like, what is the impact of that risk actually happening? In this case, we would say the impact is something like it will delay the prototype build, which will in turn have a impact on the end-to-end of the mass production of the product. I'm just making this up, by the way, so do not hold me too tightly to this, but you get the gist. If it's on critical path, you know, it will have a bigger impact. Moving on to the next bit, we want to know the severity. If this risk should happen, how bad will it be? Now, usually we put the severity on a level between low, medium, and high. In some organizations, they might put it 1, 2, 3, 1 being very, very critical, or even sometimes 0 being extra critical, but I tend to just put low, medium, and high. After that, we want to know the probability of that risk happening, right? We want to know, you know, this is gonna happen, but there's also a probability that, you know, the sun could fall from the sky. Very unlikely, but it could happen. We want to know, what is the probability of this happening? In some places of work, they might put it as a percentage. I generally just put it as low, medium, and high. Once again, it makes it just really, really easy to look at. And then the column for severity and also the probability, I tend to rag it. Rag standing for red, amber, green. Just so to my natural eye, I can see, okay, this is severe, this isn't severe, you know, this is all right. Let me know exactly where I am. It's just really, really easy for me to be able to identify the hot spots. Also on the risk register, it's really useful to have the date that the risk was raised. So that way, if it's dragging on for a period of time, or, you know, it's one of those ones that you were able to resolve quickly, you can always see, okay, when did this start? When was this a risk? Was it right from the beginning of the project? Did it pop up during the project? It's just a nice little milestone for you to be able to analyze against. We also want to see a column for the containment or mitigation plan. So there's really no point just listing out all these risks. That's really good that you're able to identify them before they even become a thing. That is really key, and that is what makes project managers really valuable, in my opinion. But also, you know, what are you gonna do about it? How are you gonna stop it from actualizing? That is, you know, more key. So the mitigation is exactly that. What is our plan of action to not allow this to become an issue? Because guys, when it becomes an issue, it's not a good day. We don't want that to happen. Mitigation. So for example, in this one that I'm giving you right now, I could put the mitigation plan is to call up vendors beforehand and to order components way in advance of the actual lead time to ensure that it's there for our build or something like that. I don't know. Once again, I'm just making this up, but you get the general gist. There needs to be a target resolution date when we hope to have this risk closed off by. So we have something that we're targeting. As it's getting close to that date, we need to start looking at, oh, damn, this is about to become an issue if it's not resolved. So, you know, we might need to put a bit of extra effort into making sure that that mitigation plan is actually actualized. And then the last two things, which I personally think are most important, is that who the risk is raised by and who the owner of that risk is. The risk raised by is the person that kind of just identifies the risk. And it could be the PM, it could be members of the team, it could be stakeholders, engineers, it can be whoever. But the risk owner is the person that is responsible for managing that risk throughout the project, to making sure that, you know, containment plans are constantly ongoing, they're up to date, they're relevant, to make sure that these risks are reported upwards if they get more, you know, severe, if the probability changes. That owner is responsible for that risk, so they should always have an eye on it. This being said, the project manager usually owns the risk register, so they will always have their eye on all of the risks, making sure that people are updating their risks and making sure that if things changes, it is communicated to all stakeholders. So yeah guys, that is a really simple risk register. I hope you can see the basic building blocks of that, but if you want me to go into more detail on risk management, because it is such a big part of project management, make sure you like this video and drop a comment down below. I'll definitely bring that out for you guys. Let's move on to assumptions. So an assumption in project management is anything that you believe to be true without empirical evidence or actual proof. So why assumptions are really important is because when you are putting down or putting together a project plan or schedule at the beginning, you might not have all the information. None of us do. In as much as you might have a scope of work, you might need to make certain assumptions in order to plan or make a schedule to fulfill the requirements of that scope of work. So for example, in project 4, I can say it is assumed that there will be sufficient resources throughout the life of the project in order to deliver the work. And that is really key and quite a common assumption made on most projects, because in an organization there tends to be lots of projects, and the engineers are not necessarily only ring-fenced or only working on your project. And this could be really tricky when it comes to the time on the schedule. It says, yo, I need you today, and they're not available. Who's at fault here? No one really. However, also that's why it's really important that when you call out your assumptions, you put a line in or a separate column that says, if this assumption should fail, the business will make a priority call as to which project needs the resources. And if it's not my project, then effectively this may have an impact on the end-to-end schedule. It's really important to write that down and to qualify it. And if there are any other similar assumptions to that, also writing it down with also what will happen or what needs to happen if that assumption should fail. The I in RAID stands for issues. And what is an issue? So remember when we were talking about risks and, you know, what could happen, you know, if that risk happens? Yeah, it becomes an issue. That is exactly what an issue is. An issue is a risk that has materialized, and now we are starting to feel the impact. Guys, let me tell you this, as a PM, you don't want issues, man. You can deal with risks, but you don't want issues. When issues arise, it's stress. Obviously you want to do everything you can possible to mitigate the risk, but sometimes life be happening that you can do and that risk actually happens and becomes an issue. We also track these issues in a log or a register, very similar to the risk register or log, which is sometimes what it's called. The only real difference, I would say, is that you really just need to focus on severity and containment plan at this point. So you'll still have the same headers. I'll try to put one up now so that you can see. You also want to know, obviously, the date that this issue arose, so effectively when it stopped being a risk and when it became an issue, if you're a really, really good PM and you saw all the risks coming, it shouldn't just jump straight to an issue. At times it can, because you know, you can't predict it all, but really, if you've really seen from the beginning that there are these risks and now it's become an issue, there should always be a risk number attached to that issue, because it would have come from being a risk over to an issue. I hope that makes sense. It's really, really important that you know your issues, you rag it once again, you put it on a severity scale, because this allows you to prioritize, okay, what do we need to focus on first? Where do we need to, you know, put extra resources to get it under control first? There won't be a probability, because guess what? That probability is 100%, baby. It's already happening. The house is on fire. Where's the fire engine? That's where we're at. At that time, it's an issue. And lastly, then we have dependencies. Dependencies refer to the relationship between tasks and how they relate with one another. Sometimes tasks need to be completed before the next task can start. So if you remember and flip back, because I know you watched it already, flip back to my project schedules video when one task couldn't start until another one ended. That's called a finish start dependency. On some rare occasions, some tasks can't start until another task has started as well. That's called a start dependency. So there are different types of relationships and interactions between tasks, and that really needs to be captured. This is so key, guys. Where people slip up in project scheduling is right here. So I need you to pay attention. I hope you're paying attention. Pay attention. This is where people slip up, because people don't effectively realize the relationship between tasks. Most people think that things are just sequential. You design it, okay, then you build it, okay, then you test it, and it just goes down in such a sequential way. But that is not always the case. Sometimes you are reliant on other work streams, not even in your department, or perhaps a piece of legislation to be passed which has nothing to do with you before you can continue with another task. It becomes really tricky, and it is so easy to delay your project plan when you do not effectively identify your dependencies, because you get to a task and realize, oh wait, I can't start. And that is a big boo-boo. So it's really, really important for you to identify all your dependencies when putting your schedule together, so you can take them into consideration. I usually like to start my dependencies in such a way it says, there is a dependency on whatever team that dependency is on to complete or to do or to yada, 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 this particular task before we can kick off this task. It's that simple, guys. There's a dependency, you need to say on who before you can kick off the next activity. And usually it's always really, really great to say by what date they need to do it as well, so everyone is really, really clear and everyone can set expectations and agree to that up front. For project 4, an example of a dependency could be, there is a dependency on the test lab to be available on said days so that we can complete our final compliance testing in order to get it out the door. What happens if they are not available on those dates? Guess what? I am delayed, and that is not good. But if that is not agreed at the beginning of the project, you're gonna get to the test lab on the day and say, yo, I'm ready to start. They're gonna be like, I'm so sorry, we're not ready for you. And then you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, I needed you to be ready. And they're gonna be like, when did you say that? When did I agree to that? It's a bit sticky as a project manager to be in that position, so do not get caught out. That is basically an introduction to RAID. And RAID's risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies need to be analyzed right at the beginning as you're creating your project plan and as you're creating your budget. I'm saying this now, guys, do not submit your project plan or project schedule or your budget without having those parameters. Listen, in a world where you cannot control everything, you need to capture your RAID effectively. So guys, I hope this video was interesting. I hope it was super helpful for you. And that concludes part 3 of my project management tools. I hope you're fully equipped. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that's supporting me. I really do appreciate it, guys. I'm happy you guys are getting jobs. I'm happy you're being more efficient and productive in your life. It just makes me really happy. Guys, I have something special coming for you as well, so do stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.